Welcome to Planetary Calendar's Astro Portraits. I'm Lahni DeAmicis, one of the astrologers. Our portrait this week is James Taylor, the singer-songwriter who's had a very long career. This is a particular favorite of mine. It's probably generational, but actually when I look at the chart, I understand why I like his music. But of course, I'm shared by millions of people who like his music, so it may not be so individual for me after all. But nevertheless, let's take a look at his chart. In some ways, he's the classic Piscean. A dreamer, a person who's traveled a great deal, all Jupiter ruled, a person who's had a problem with drugs and addiction, qualities you find oftentimes with the Piscean energy. And yet they also rise to the top. He's a tremendously talented artist, a very creative songwriter, and someone who's been very connected into the mythos and storytelling of our society. He has Virgo rising, which is interesting because it gives him a bit of the common man feeling. You oftentimes, see him pictured in blue jeans, in a work shirt. That's the image of the common man, that Virgo rising, the craftsman, the common people, the person out there in the field. He has the moon in Aries. It's a very dynamic moon. It likes to engage. It tends to be rambunctious and impulsive at times. It's actually a good position for an artist because it has that fire that burns up. And considering the Pisces sun, which is so watery, that fire moon, it's water and fire close together. It's only less than 30 degrees, 22 degrees Pisces to 15 degrees Aries. It's less than 30 degrees between the two of them. You have fire and water so close together. It creates an essential tension that an artist has to have in their chart. They have to have some tension that makes them want to express. The moon's in the 8th house, which is about how we manage our resources. So in terms of that, he may have issues because that's a rough... The moon's so changeable in the 8th house, which is a fixed house. It likes steady, enduring efforts, and the moon wants to change, and it's in the most impulsive sign. So, is Pallas Athena there? Well, symbolically, this is a person who had problems with drugs, with needles. Pallas Athena is sharp objects in Aries, impulsive. People who are using drugs many times aren't thinking about the long terms, and that's even things like cigarettes. People who smoke cigarettes aren't thinking long term. It's all short term. He has Venus in Taurus in the 9th house. This is a planet in rulership. In Taurus, the sign of music. Venus, the arts, in the sign of music, in the 9th house of that which we give freely to others in a generous way. It's also the house of travel. He's traveled a great deal because of his music. And this is a rulership position. And remember, those rulership positions, they very much express in the outer world. Who else is in rulership? He has Jupiter in Sagittarius, a very strong position. But in the 4th house, the house of his home. So he's made his home in many different places, great distances from where he was born. He's written so many songs, the traveling man. In fact, I remember during one particular concert that they recorded him saying, well, this is a traveling song. After a while, you write a lot of those. Well, there's a lot of artists who tour who don't write traveling songs. But he has the moon in the 4th house in Sagittarius. The traveling is a big part of it. I think the only movie that I know he was in where he was a character was about traveling back and forth across the country in cars. He really thinks of the home as being the road. in certain ways. The Jupiter is loosely trine that moon in the 8th house. So there's that challenge that goes there. Every time there's maybe pressure about how you're going to manage the resources, part of it is to escape onto the road. That's one way of looking at it. The Venus, right, is in a quintile. And this is, in some ways, real core to the chart, to the Mercury in Aquarius. Remember, he only has the Sun in Pisces. Mercury is in the sign before Aquarius, the exalted position. It's a very electrical position. Conjunct Juno, the marriage asteroid, in the 6th house. So it's a basic skill. Okay. It can be very creative, but it really kind of gets inspiration very easily. It's in a quintile to the Venus in the 9th house, which is this very stable Venus. And it's interesting, too, because these are two fixed signs. But because of the positioning, Mercury so late, 25, and Venus so early, it sets up a quintile, and it's actually between the Juno-Mercury conjunction to the Venus, that the quintile forms. Quintiles are a sign of creativity. Well, for a songwriter, having as your basic skill Mercury, the ability to write, Juno, with someone, in other words, having a partner, a spouse, a pretty girl there with him, a beautiful woman, a nice loving person in Aquarius, is part of his inspiration that feeds to the Venus and Taurus an expression through music in the 9th house that he shares with the world. It comes out especially strongly because the midheaven, how he meets his world, is in the 10th house, right? Which is the house of acclaim. And all that stuff in the air sign Aquarius is generally trine that. In fact, the Mercury and Juno are trine the Uranus in the 10th house, which has a lot to do with mass communication. So that basic skill projects right up into that career house for mass communication. So his internal process, the Mercury-Venus, is the creativity, the songwriting. The Mercury then communicates to the Uranus in the midheaven to project it out into the world. And of course, most people who have heard him through electronics. Uranus, remember, was discovered in the mid-1700s when the first serious research was being done on electricity that then led to the creation of the phonograph and the CD and the digital. And this is how most people have heard him, through the Uranus in the 10th house, through communication. But it's also about groups. And he's, of course, performed extensively. Now, he's a Piscean. They're in the 7th house. This is a house that's all about partnership. And he's been married several times. And the partnerships matter a great deal to him. But this is all over in the western part of the chart. What gets him out there on the stage? Well, his Mars and Leo. He has Mars and Leo. It's actually in the 12th house, conjunct Saturn and Pluto. Now, these guys, to a certain extent, could be troubled, but they could also be a great resource, because the 12th house is the studio. The 12th house is the stage. The 12th house is about creating the illusion of, right? You find many, many important people in movies who have powerful 12th houses. But additionally, the Mars is up in what's called the Gogolon spot. It's a spot clockwise from the rising, okay? It gives the planet a huge amount of leverage, and it's Mars in Leo. Now, it's funny because it's retrograde. So when he performs, even though he's comfortable getting up on a stage, he's had a harder time taking applause, because it's so internalized. Mars retrograde is not an easy position because Mars really likes being out there, expressing the energy externally. Mars goes retrograde less than any other planet. And retrograde, it's not usually comfortable. It can be a frustrating time. And that's part of the difficulty he has, that these three planets are retrograde. He oftentimes feels the frustration of that. The Saturn there and the Pluto there means, one, he has the ability to really endure. It gives him great discipline, great, when you combine Mars and Saturn together, you have the physical exuberance of Mars combined with Saturn's dedication and endurance. The Pluto there supercharges it. It makes it intense. It's an obsession. So he could be in the studio for tremendously long periods of time being creative. Leo is, after all, a very creative sign. It's the sign of the sun. The Mars is trine the moon in the 8th house. His ability to work well with groups of musicians is really powerful. He's good at managing people. His one-on-one with people is probably really good because he's right there with you emotionally. You can understand, though, with this powerful 12th house, the moon in the 8th house, how addiction could very much be an issue because his frustration at this, he has so much creativity, that Mercury, Juno, quintile, the Venus, there's so much creativity that he's doing in partnership, the sun in the 7th house, trying to actualize it through a group in the studio to get truly what he's hearing in his head out there to the world. With all the talent he has and all the skills, he's a highly skilled musician, is still frustrating to him because, the thing about the Piscean energy, they say it dives to the depths, but it goes to the surface. As it's moving towards the surface and it sees the sun shining up above that surface, they're trying to attain that. And when you fall short, it's frustrating. And that could be one of the issues about, drugs and obsession. And the sun in the 7th house in Pisces, and Astrea is also there. The sharing, remember the time when he first would have encountered drugs was he's born 1948, March 12th, 1948, 5:06 p.m. in Boston, Massachusetts, Eastern Standard Time. He would have first encountered it when cannabis was around, when pot, and this was, at a time when the Vietnam War was taking place, the rise of the what you call the hippie movement, but really basically the revolt of the young people against years and years of war. You had the First World War, which rolled practically in after a gap into the Second World War. First World War, Prohibition, then the Second World War, and then they had this huge army, this huge military, and it says, well, let's go visit Korea. Let's go. And they were all over the world doing stuff, and let's go to Vietnam. And now you had a generation of people who were born right after the Second World War who was saying, whoa, this has become a culture of war. Shouldn't we be focusing on something else like love? And the passing of cannabis, the passing of that within the group, was part of a communal gathering. It was a way of sharing together. But because of other things in his chart, it led him into other issues with, deeper, diving deeper into this. That then led to his problems, and many years in there. But you understand how he could be frustrated with so much talent, having to express it through so many people to get it out into the commercial world when they're tapping into so much genius. I think it's interesting with a person like this, how much they are on the edge, fire and water, so close together, how much they're on the edge and how they can be so creative. And if they can keep themselves balanced, if the people around them, the fact he did it in partnership, Juno conjunct his Mercury, the sun in the 7th house, people around him kept him balanced. His desire for balance was strong. The 7th house sun, that's how he was able to endure. So, a fascinating artist, a fascinating chart. I hope you enjoyed it. So, come and see the next portrait. We post those on Tuesday. And come and see our forecasts. We post those on Friday at our Planetary Calendar Astrology YouTube channel. And of course, visit planetarycalendar.com, because in case you need your calendars or you need your day planners. And I hope you found this portrait illuminating.